Well, it all started, for me anyway, started smoking marijuana when I was around 13 or 14. I had a couple friends that were not essentially good influences, and unfortunately at the time I wasn't a very good leader or a good influence for myself. So I took to these friends in an unhealthy manner. We started hanging out and we started, experimenting with different things, one of them being marijuana and the other being alcohol. So my first ever experience with prescription narcotics was through my father. I just remember coming up to him and saying, "I have a headache." So he comes back and he hands me this little white pill. And I take it and I'm like, "What's this?" And he says, "It's a Percocet." And I said, "Oh." I'm like, "You take it?" And he says, "Yes, I take it. It's okay. It'll make your headache go away. It might make you a little sleepy, but it's okay." So I take the Percocet. And that is the start of a long, hard battle with prescription painkillers and prescription narcotics. As before then, I had in my mind that I was never gonna touch pills. I was never gonna smoke any kind of crazy drug other than maybe some weed. But through my father, in my mind, it gave my conscience an excuse. Oh, my dad does it, he's okay. And when I took that pill, I felt great. I really did. I felt, warm and fuzzy, and all my problems seemed to disappear and fade into the darkness. So that really became the starting point of when I started using these substances to mask some of the trauma or mask some of the hurdles or obstacles in my life that I was facing, instead of having to face them head on and coming up with rational decisions to help further my life. I started using substances. I started with the painkillers, and my first run-in with prescription amphetamines was at a very early age. I think that was even before I even experimented with marijuana. So my older cousin, being a year older than me at the time, I think he was 13, I think I was 12, he brought a bag full of these little blue and orange pills, and I didn't know what they were, didn't know what they would do. I didn't know if he took them regularly. I didn't know. He was such a profound and strong influence over me that I was willing to take that pill. Take two of them, actually. Take two of those pills completely unbeknownst to what they were or what they would do. So, needless to say, I had one of the craziest experiences I've ever had. I just remember feeling like I was going to die. So the experimentation with the amphetamines rolls into the painkillers and rolls into the marijuana. Marijuana was the most steady because I had somebody in my house that smokes regularly. So I always had marijuana on tap. Well, my drug problem, it went along for about 12 years, I want to say, continuously. I went to rehab in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, I had gotten married and I had a little baby. So I knew something was wrong and I knew I needed to get help, not really knowing why or what or when. Honestly, I didn't even want to get help. I didn't want to. I didn't think there was a problem. I really never messed with anything except for pharmaceutical pain pills. And in Pennsylvania, in rehab, all I wanted to hear was about heroin and how cheaper and how better heroin was for you and for your wallet. How stronger it was for you than the pain pills. So just so conveniently, I knew exactly where to get heroin when I got back home. I knew exactly where to get it. After going into rehab and hearing these war stories of these guys glorifying their addictions, it only fed mine. So I went back home and immediately I started doing heroin. My choice of using any kind of drug, if it wasn't smoking marijuana, it was through my nose. I sniffed everything. I crushed everything and sniffed it. Thank the Lord for my fear of needles, because if it wasn't for that, I definitely would be an intravenous drug user, ex-intravenous drug user. I was homeless and I was living with somebody who was an intravenous drug user, and I was in the midst of breaking up with my then wife. So they had kicked me out because I was no longer able to stay there because of my behavior, and I was unhealthy for the baby and the rest of everybody who was there trying to succeed in life. So there was something always there in the back of my mind that was maybe a survival instinct, or a cry for help, or a cry for safety, like, you're going to die, you're not going to be okay. But that's the sickness and just the twisted deception of the addiction and how it hijacks your brain. It doesn't matter who you love, it doesn't matter what you love, it doesn't matter what you want to do, it doesn't matter whatever, it doesn't matter. The thing that comes first is getting high, is getting a fix. I couldn't go anywhere without being high. I couldn't wake up without being high. I couldn't go to sleep without being high. My turning point was when I had gotten severely addicted to fentanyl. So in the midst of that, I developed an eating disorder. So I wouldn't eat for days and days and days. And I was so depressed through the divorce and my circumstances that I did not have the will to live, but I also didn't have the will to take myself out of this world. So I tried everything in my power to bring me to that point. I began to severely get emaciated. I was 100 pounds, and I was using fentanyl every day. People were dying left and right. People were dying all around me that were using it. And at this point now I have 2 kids, and I knew something had to change. I wanted to change. I wanted to get help, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. From the addiction, it had me prisoner. At this point, I began stealing and pawning everything that I owned. Not only everything that I owned, everything that I could get my hands on, which involved theft, property damage. I stole from several smoke shops. So I wrote a bad check. That's how bad addiction gets, is you lose everything, you lose everyone. You don't care. You will steal from your own mother who gave you life. So I wrote a bad check in my mom's name and brought it to the bank, and they red flagged it. They called her, and she says, don't arrest him, just don't write the check and send him on his way. So I'm leaving the bank. She calls me. She says, James, she says, you're going to jail or you're going to get help. Pick one. And I try to come up with every excuse, right? Every excuse to not go into help, not going to treatment, or that, just whatever. I didn't want to go. So she says, pick one. She says, I'm not playing around. You need to go get help. Pick one. So I went into rehab, and that was really the turning point for me, was writing that bad check. I don't think if I think if I didn't write that bad check, I think I would be dead. And I really wanted help this time. I wanted to be done. I was tired. I was beat up from it. The addiction had done its work. Yeah, I was tired and I was done. So my first experience with fentanyl that I can remember is in pill form. I remember getting these fake pressed Mbox 30 pills, and I could tell right off the bat that they were not real. I could tell by the color. Now this was back when you could notice these slight differences and they didn't perfect it yet. So you were able to pick up on these key differences and be able to tell what's real and what's not. Now you cannot. Now it is identical. Withdrawals from these substances are something out of a horror film. It's only the deepest and darkest parts of the horror film that you can think of, stuff that they're not even really allowed to film because it's so bad that the general public is not allowed to see. That's what it feels like. It feels like a nightmare that you're stuck in. It feels like you're drowning. It feels like you're drowning, and it feels like you can't swim. It feels like you're frozen in place and you're underwater and you're looking up at the surface, but you can't move. I could not sleep. I could not eat. I could not sit still. I could not lay still. I was throwing up blood at some points. I was throwing up out of both ends. Meanwhile, not being able to make it to the bathroom. So I was essentially laying in my own waste. The headaches, the blinding pain behind my eyes, the not being able to smell anything for months, not being able to taste anything without throwing up for weeks. It was awful. The withdrawals are absolutely terrible. And that's not even accounting for the mental withdrawal that you're going through. The anxiety, the depression, the rage, every emotion that you can think of, you feel it all at once while you're throwing up onto your own pillow. It is okay to be not okay. It's perfectly normal to be not okay, to not feel okay, to feel like there's something wrong with you or that maybe you don't fit in. That's perfectly okay. That's normal. I just don't want any of you to take that a step further and try to use something as a crutch to make yourself feel better, because it's only a fake mask that you're putting on. It's only a temporary fix to a problem behind the scenes that only grows and gets much bigger. And at that point, once you realize it, it's too late.